I never planned on spending my summer pushing a mower across endless lawns. But when rent is due and tuition bills keep piling up, you take what you can get. A friend of mine tipped me off about the gig. Easy cash, he said. Just mow and go. And for the most part, he was right. Most of the neighborhood clients were exactly what you'd expect. From a sleepy suburban street, sweet old ladies who tipped me with lemonade and home-baked cookies, dads who waved from the driveways while tossing baseballs with their kids, young moms who asked me to carry bags of mulch to the backyard. It was simple work, and honestly most of the time I didn't mind. But there was one house that always made me tense up the second I pulled my mower onto the curb. It wasn't the house itself. It was neat, squared away, almost too perfect. The lawn looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. Trimmed hedges and symmetrical flower beds. No toys scattered in the grass, no porch decorations, no welcome mat, just precision, sterile, controlled. And then there was him. He lived alone in that house, and everyone in the neighborhood seemed to have a story about him. Overheard one woman at the corner house whisper to her friend that he used to be a cop. Retired early, she added, like it meant something. Another guy claimed he was discharged after an incident. Nobody ever said more than that. But the way they looked over their shoulders when they talked about him told me all I needed to know. He wasn't the type of man people got close to. The first time I saw him, I understood why. I was halfway through trimming the hedges when I felt that prickle on the back of my neck. The feeling of being watched. Glanced up, and there he was on the porch. Late 40s, maybe pushing 50, but still built like someone who could handle himself in a fight. Broad shoulders under a plain gray t-shirt, arms corded with muscle, the kind you don't get from gym memberships but from years of real work. His hair was dark, with streaks of gray, cropped short, and his eyes, God, those eyes, piercing, sharp, like they were cutting straight through me and measuring me up all at once. I froze for a second, the trimmer buzzing uselessly in my hand. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just stood there, with his arms crossed, watching me like I was a suspect caught in a lie. When he finally spoke, his voice carried in that low, commanding way that made my stomach knot. You missed a spot. I turned, fumbling to see where. There was a strip of uneven grass by the edge of the flower bed. I muttered something, sorry sir, and fixed it quickly, pretending not to notice how his gaze stayed on me the whole time. After that, he went back inside, but the weight of him lingered. I tried telling myself it was nothing, just another client, another house, another paycheck. But every time I came back to mow his lawn, I felt that same pressure, like I was being graded on a test I didn't remember signing up for. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was clipped to the point. Bag the clippings this time. Watch the edges. Don't leave the hose out. I hated how my pulse jumped at his voice. Hated how it felt like an order instead of a request. And yet I obeyed. The strangest part, though, was how my eyes kept betraying me. At first, I only noticed the obvious things. The square set of his jaw, the way his shirt clung to his chest when he crossed his arms, the solid way he carried himself, like gravity bent a little harder around him. But then there were the smaller details that stuck with me. The roughness in his hands when he briefly handed me cash. The faint scar at his temple I caught when the light hit his face. The way his voice dipped lower when he was annoyed. I'd never admit it out loud. Not then, not even to myself. But I caught myself stealing glances when I thought he wasn't looking. And when I left, sweaty and exhausted, I sometimes replayed our brief exchanges in my head longer than I wanted to. Of course, I had no business noticing any of that. He was older, intimidating, the kind of man who probably didn't give a damn about some broke kid mowing lawns. If he thought about me at all, it was probably in the way you think about a tool. Useful only when it's working. Right. Still, there was something about him that lingered. Something about the way he looked at me, like I was being tested for weaknesses I didn't know I had. I told myself I kept coming back because the pay was good, and it paid more than the others, always in cash, crisp bills folded tight enough to cover rent and groceries, and that alone should have been the end of it. But deep down, I knew there was another reason. Each week as I hauled my mower down his driveway, part of me dreaded seeing him again. Another part of me couldn't wait. The sun was brutal that afternoon, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. Sweat rolled down my back as I pushed the mower across the side yard, desperate to finish before the blades of grass baked me alive. My headphones were dead, so it was just me, the engine, and the cycus buzzing like some endless alarm clock. Should have been paying more attention. I'd done this yard enough times to know the layout, the precise edges, the trimmed hedges, the carefully tended flower beds that lined the walk. But exhaustion makes you careless. The mower jerked forward when I hit a patch of uneven ground, and before I realized it, the front wheel crunched over something soft. I yanked the mower back, but it was too late. A swath of purple blooms, neatly planted in rows, lay shredded in the dirt. I killed the mower, staring at the damage like I could will it back into place. Maybe if I fixed the soil, tucked the stems back in, he wouldn't notice. The voice boomed from the porch, cutting through the heat like thunder. My stomach dropped. He was already coming down the steps, moving fast, his shadow stretching long across the grass. His jaw was set, eyes locked on the flower bed like he'd caught me committing a crime. What the hell do you think you're doing? His voice cracked sharp, that old cop authority ringing in every word. It wasn't just anger, it was command, the kind that made you freeze before you even realized you had. I didn't mean to, stammered, hands raised like I was surrendering. The mower caught the edge. I lost control for a second. He crouched beside the ruined flowers, picking up a broken stem between two fingers. His glare shifted back to me hard enough to make my throat tighten. These were not weeds. Do you have any idea how long it took to get them to bloom like this? Swallowed, heat prickling worse than the sun. I'm sorry. I'll fix it or pay for replacements. Not out here. He cut me off, straightening to his full height. His voice dropped lower, colder. Come inside. We'll discuss it properly. The way he said it left no room for argument. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. My instincts screamed to pack up my mower and walk, but my legs carried me after him anyway, up the porch steps and through the front door. Inside, the air was cooler but heavier somehow. The blinds were half drawn, cutting the light into sharp slices across the living room. Everything was neat, squared away just like the yard. Dark leather couch, wooden coffee table, not a speck of dust out of place. He shut the door behind me, the sound final, like a lock clicking. I hovered near the entryway, heart hammering. Look, I said, I'm sorry. I'll replace the flowers. Okay, no need to. Quiet. The word snapped through the air. He stepped closer, not rushing, just deliberate, each movement controlled. That cop's stance again, shoulders squared, eyes unblinking. I backed up until my heel hit the wall. He stopped just a foot away, close enough that I caught the faint scent of aftershave mixed with sweat. His hand lifted, not to strike, not to shove, but to press lightly against my arm. The heat of his palm startling against my skin. You need to pay more attention, he said, voice low, now almost steady but charged with something else. You can't just stumble through life making mistakes and apologizing later. I should have shoved his hand away. I should have stormed out right then, but for one frozen second I didn't move. His eyes held mine, unyielding, intense, and the weight of that stare made it hard to breathe. Wasn't just anger in them. There was something else, something sharper, hungrier. His fingers tightened slightly, not painful but enough to make me aware of how much stronger he was. He leaned in, the space between us shrinking until I felt his breath brush my cheek. My pulse thudded loud in my ears, and then I realized what was happening. I jerked my arm back, shoving away from the wall. No, I said, loud, my voice cracking. No, I don't know what you think this is, but his jaw flexed, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. But he didn't move closer again. He just stood there, staring as if daring me to explain why my chest was heaving like I'd run a mile. I'm not. This isn't. The words tangled, clumsy. I didn't even know what I was trying to deny. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. My skin buzzed with adrenaline. With confusion I couldn't untangle within. Anger I wasn't sure was meant for him or for myself. Finally, I bolted. I yanked. The door open, heat slamming back into me as I stumbled onto the porch. My mower sat abandoned in the grass, engine silent, the ruined flower bed glaring up at me like evidence. I grabbed the handle and dragged it down the driveway, not caring about the uneven wheels clattering against the concrete behind me. I half expected him to shout to order me back, but the only sound was the cicadas and the thud of my own heartbeat. When I reached the sidewalk, I stopped just long enough to suck in a breath. My hands were shaking. My shirt clung to me with sweat, but the chill running down my spine wasn't from the heat. I told myself I was humiliated, that I was angry that he had no right to put his hands on me, no right to close in like that. And yet, even as I stormed off with my mower rattling behind me, a part of me couldn't shake the image of his eyes, hard, unrelenting, and something else smoldering underneath, something I wasn't ready to name. The whole walk home I swore to myself I was done. No more mowing that lawn. No more tense silences. No more being barked at like I was some rookie on his beat. And definitely no more moments like the one that had just happened inside his house. I replayed it in my head 100 times before I even made it back to my apartment. The hand on my arm, the way he leaned in, his eyes like steel but burning hot at the same time, the shift in his voice, low and deliberate, cutting straight into me, and my own reaction, the way I froze for that heartbeat. I hadn't shoved him away. I stood there letting the air between us crackle until my brain snapped back and told my body to run. I told myself I hated it, that he was a creep who didn't understand boundaries, that he thought his size and authority gave him the right to corner me in his house like that. And maybe all of that was true, but hating it didn't explain why I couldn't stop replaying it. By the time I dropped my mower in the shed behind my building, my mind was a mess of contradictions. I wanted to scrub the memory from my head. I also wanted to rewind it to see what would have happened if I hadn't yanked my arm away, if I hadn't bolted like a scared kid. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Tossed and turned in the sticky heat of my apartment. Sheets twisted around me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again. Furrowed brow, clenched jaw, eyes locked on mine like he could see straight through every defense I'd ever built. What would he have done if I'd let him stay that close? If I hadn't run, the thought made me angry at myself. I buried my face in the pillow, muttering curses, but it didn't stop the restless churn in my chest. The next morning, one of my friends texted to ask how the summer job was going. We met up later at a diner, and I knew the question was coming. Sure enough, over greasy eggs and burnt coffee, he leaned back and smirked. So how's lawn boy life? Any hot moms offering you lemonade? I laughed it off, shaking my head. Nah man, just the usual. Ladies, sprinklers, sunburn. I didn't mention the ex-cop. I didn't mention the flower bed or the hand on my arm or the way my heart still raced when I thought about it. I told myself it was because it didn't matter, because I'd quit that house anyway. But the truth was simpler. I couldn't put it into words without exposing something I wasn't ready to admit. Of course, quitting was easier said than done. His paycheck alone covered half my rent. Losing that income would mean late bills, cheap noodles for weeks, maybe even borrowing money I didn't have anyone to borrow from. Needed the job. So the next week, against every promise I made to myself, I hauled my mower back down that street. The moment I turned onto his driveway, my chest tightened. My steps slowed, like my body was trying to buy time before I crossed that invisible line again. The flower bed was still scarred from where I'd wrecked it, the soil bare and accusing. And then the door opened. He stepped out onto the porch, same as always, arms folded, gaze fixed on me. But this time there was no anger, no comment about the ruined flowers. He just nodded once, almost like nothing had happened. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to start the mower. The engine's roar gave me cover, a reason not to look at him. I kept my eyes on the grass, cutting precise, careful lines, making sure not a single will touch the edge of anything. Every so often, though, I felt it, that weight like heat on the back of my neck, pulling at me, daring me to glance up. When I finally gave in, his eyes were already on me, steady and unreadable. I snapped my gaze away, jaw tight. I wasn't going to give him anything. Not this time. The hours crawled. By the time I killed the mower and started bagging clippings, my nerves were shot. I kept my movements clipped, efficient, pretending he wasn't leaning on the porch rail, watching, pretending I didn't feel the silence stretching between us, thick and unspoken. When I finally wheeled the mower down the driveway, he stepped forward. For a split second, my stomach clenched, bracing for him to say something, anything that would drag me back into that place I'd been trying to escape all. But he didn't. He just held out the usual folded bills. No lecture, no smirk, no hint of what had happened before. Good work, he said simply, his voice even. I took the money without looking up, muttered a thanks, and kept walking. But the whole way home, the silence screamed louder than words ever could. Because if nothing had happened, if it had all been some heat-fueled misunderstanding, then why did it feel like every step of that job now was some unspoken test? Why did the air between us hum like it was waiting to spark again? I told myself it was over, that I was done thinking about him the second I walked away. But later that night, lying awake again in my too-hot room, I couldn't stop imagining those eyes following me. Not angry this time, not commanding, just waiting. And I hated how much I wanted to know what would happen if I let them. I thought I could compartmentalize him, keep him boxed away in that one yard, that one job. Those hours I pushed the mower under his heavy gaze. Then I could leave, shut the door on him until the next week. Clean lines, simple. But the world didn't cooperate. The first time I saw him outside of his property, I froze. I was at the grocery store, standing in front of the milk cooler with my basket half full of instant noodles, cheap bread, and whatever fruit was on sale. Reached for the last carton of whole milk just as someone else's hand landed on it too. I looked up, and there he was. For a second, neither of us moved. His eyes flicked down to the milk, then back to mine. The corner of his mouth twitched like he might smirk, but it never fully happened. You take it, he said finally, pulling his hand back. His voice was calm this time, not sharp, but it still carried that weight that made my chest tighten. Thanks, I muttered, shoving the carton into my basket before I could think too much about it. We both stood there longer than we needed to, baskets dangling, the silence stretching. Then I nodded, awkward, and turned down the next aisle. But even as I walked away, I felt his gaze linger a moment too long. The next encounter was at the mailbox cluster at the end of the street. I just finished work for another client and decided to check my mail before heading home. Bills, junk, more bills. When I shut the metal door, I turned and nearly bumped into him. He had a stack of envelopes in one hand, a set of keys in the other. He stepped back just enough to avoid collision. I steady on me. Afternoon, he said. Yeah. My voice came out tight. Half expected him to bring up the lawn, or the flowers, or that night in his house. But he didn't. He just slipped his keys into his pocket and asked, "How's business? Lot of lawns this week?" I blinked. It was such a normal question, so casual it threw me off balance. "Oh yeah, keeping busy. Good," he said, like that was the whole conversation. He gave a small nod and turned back toward his place, leaving me standing there with my pulse hammering. For reasons I couldn't explain. The third time it was raining. I'd finished another yard across the neighborhood and had just started the long walk back to my apartment when the sky broke open. Sheets of water came down, soaking me in seconds. My mower rattled beside me, the wheels dragging through puddles. Headlights flashed behind me. I turned, squinting through the rain, and saw a truck rolling slow along the curb. This truck. He pulled up alongside me, window sliding down. "Get in," he called over the sound of the downpour. I shook my head, gripping the mower tighter. "Oh, fine. You're drenched." His voice carried that tone again. Less suggestion, more command. "Throw the mower in the back. I'll drive you." Hesitated, water dripping into my eyes, shirt plastered to my skin. Pride told me to keep walking, but the storm was relentless and I was already shivering. Finally, I gave in, heaving the mower into the bed of his truck and climbing into the passenger seat. The cab smelled faintly of leather and rain. I sat stiff, dripping onto the seat while he drove in silence. The only sound was the wipers dragging across the glass. After a few minutes, he glanced at me. "You're going to catch cold if you keep working like that." I shrugged. "Bills don't care about the weather." Something flickered in his expression. Something almost like respect. "Fair point." He dropped me off at my building, helped me wrestle the mower out of the bed, and drove off without another word. But the warmth of that short ride lingered longer than I wanted it to. After that, I started noticing him more. Not just when he was looking at me, but when he wasn't. One evening, as I was leaving another job down the block, I saw him helping Mrs. Turner, the elderly widow who lived 2 doors down from him. She'd spilled her grocery bags on the curb, and he was kneeling in the rain, gathering cans and tucking them gently back into the paper sacks. She patted his arm and said something that made him smile. A small, fleeting thing I'd never seen before. Another night, walking home late, I spotted him circling the neighborhood with a flashlight. He paused at each house, checking doors, scanning driveways, making sure everything was locked up tight. At first, I thought it was nosy, invasive, but the way he stopped to fix a kid's bike left in the yard, propping it safely against a porch rail, told me it was something else. It was watching out for people. Was unsettling at first, like the neighborhood was his beat and we were all suspects. But the longer I watched, the more I realized it wasn't suspicion driving him. It was protection. And against every instinct I had, against every angry thought I'd clung to since that afternoon in his house, I started to feel something I couldn't shake. Safer. I hated admitting it, even to myself. But when I knew he was around, the dark streets felt less threatening. The noise of the world felt quieter, like someone else was carrying the weight I didn't even know I was holding. I told myself I was still angry, that he had no right to touch me like he did, no right to corner me, and that was true. But the lines blurred every time I saw those small acts of kindness. Every time I caught him looking at me with something softer in his eyes, I wanted to keep hating him. I wanted to cling to that. But late at night, lying awake, again I realized the anger was getting harder to hold on to, and what was creeping in to take its place was far more dangerous. It happened on a Thursday evening, one of those heavy summer days where the air still felt thick even after the sun dipped behind the houses. I was bagging clippings at the edge of his yard, sweat clinging to my shirt, when I realized he'd been standing on the porch longer than usual. Normally he gave me a curtain nod, handed me cash, and retreated without fuss. This time, though, he didn't move. He lingered, hands resting on the railing, gaze fixed on me like he was weighing something heavier than grass or flower beds. When I finally wheeled the mower toward the driveway, he stepped down and walked closer. My pulse jumped. Instinct told me to brace myself, but his face looked different. Tense, yes, but not angry. Almost uncertain. "I owe you an apology," he said. I froze, gripping the mower handle tighter. I must have looked confused, because he cleared his throat and tried again. "About the flowers, about that day, He gestured vaguely, like the memory itself embarrassed him. I was out of line. The words landed heavier than I expected. This was a man who carried authority in every step, who never admitted mistakes. Hearing him say it cracked something in the wall I'd built around him. "I shouldn't have cornered you," he continued, voice rougher now, as if the words scraped on the way out. "I didn't mean to scare you," I let out, a humorless laugh, folding my arms. "Yeah, well, you did." He nodded once, accepting it without defense. Silence stretched between us, filled with the hum of cicadas and the faint whir of someone's sprinkler down the block. Finally he said softer, "I don't know how to do this anymore." "Do what?" He rubbed a hand over his jaw, eyes dropping for the first time. "Connect, talk to people, be around them without barking orders," or he trailed off, shaking his head. "The job rewires you. You spend years telling yourself emotions get in the way. Then one day, you look around and realize you don't know how to be normal anymore." I wasn't sure what to say to that. Part of me still wanted to stay angry to remind him of how intimidating he'd been, how small he'd made me feel. But another part, a quieter, softer part, saw the loneliness etched in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged like he was carrying something invisible. For the first time he looked less like a wall, and more like a man standing behind one. I exhaled slowly. Maybe try saying things without sounding like a cop, giving a warning. His lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. That bad, huh? Pretty bad, I said, though the edge in my voice softened. Something shifted after that. The next time I came by, he was in the garage tinkering with tools. Normally I just mow in silence, but he called out, "Hand me that wrench, will you?" Hesitated, then stepped inside. The air smelling of oil and metal. I picked up the wrench and passed it over, our fingers brushing briefly. Neither of us mentioned it, but the spark lingered in the silence. "You're holding it wrong," he said after a moment, watching me heft the mower blades I'd been sharpening. "Oh, I'm sorry," I shot back, rolling my eyes. "Guess I must have missed the advanced course in lawn care mechanics." His laugh surprised both of us. Low, rough but real, pulled at something inside me I hadn't realized was wound so tight. From then on, the banter slipped, and like it belonged. "You missed a spot," he said one day, leaning on the porch. "Yeah, maybe I was distracted by the guy staring holes in the back of my head," I retorted, his eyebrows lifted. But instead of barking back, he chuckled. "Fair enough." Little by little, the sharp edges between us dulled. The silences weren't so heavy anymore. Sometimes we just stand near each other. Me packing up tools, him nursing a glass of water, and the quiet felt easier. Not comfortable exactly, but no longer suffocating. I started noticing the smaller things. The way his shoulders brushed mine when we squeezed past each other in the garage. The warmth of his arm when he handed me something. The way his eyes lingered a second longer than necessary when I looked up unexpectedly. None of it was spoken. None of it crossed the line. But all of it simmered. Unspoken heat, threading through every interaction. And though I told myself I was still cautious, still guarded, I couldn't deny it anymore. He was human, flawed, lonely, awkward as hell, but human. And somehow that made him harder to hate. Was supposed to be like every other job. I trimmed the hedges, edged the walk, bagged the clippings, and packed up the mower. The sun was still high, throwing long, sharp shadows across the yard. Was already halfway down the driveway when his voice stopped me. "You ever take a break?" I turned. He was leaning against the porch rail, one hand on the post, the other holding a sweating blast. Condensation slid down the sides, catching the light. "Not really," I said. "The grass doesn't mow itself." His mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Come inside. Have a drink on the house." I froze. My gut told me to wave it off, to keep walking and pretend I hadn't heard. But there was something in his tone this time. Lighter, less like a command and more like an offering. Hesitated, then shrugged. "One drink. That's it." He stepped back to let me through the door. Inside, the house felt different. I'd been in here once before, but that day it had been tense, suffocating. Now the blinds were cracked, wider, letting in golden afternoon light that softened the edges of the room. Low lamp glowed in the corner, not harsh, just warm. The air smelled faintly of leather and something citrus. The couch cushions were sunken from years of use. The coffee table stacked with old magazines and a few dog-eared paperbacks. It wasn't the fortress I'd imagined. It was lived in, almost cozy. He gestured toward the table. "Beer, soda, water. Take your pick." I had the options, then grabbed a soda, popping the top. He took a beer, sat across from me, and leaned back, studying me in that quiet way of his. "So," I said after a sip, trying to cut through the silence, "do you invite all your lawn guys in for a drink, or am I just special?" His laugh was low, unexpected. "Just you?" That shouldn't have made my chest tighten the way it did. We started with small talk. Weather, baseball, the price of gas. But the conversation didn't stay there. He asked about school, about what I was studying, about what I wanted after. No one asked me that. Not seriously. Not like they cared about the answer. I told Him bits and pieces about my mom who worked 2 jobs, about how I was scraping together enough to cover tuition, about how sometimes I wasn't sure what the hell I was even chasing. He didn't interrupt. He didn't brush it. He just listened, eyes steady, nodding now and then like he understood. What about you? I asked after a while, leaning back in my chair. You ever regret the force? His jaw tightened. He took a slow drink, then set the bottle down carefully. Every day, he said, the words hung heavy between us. I saw too much, did too much, and when I left, it was like stepping out of one world and realizing I didn't know how to live in another. There was no bravado in his tone, just honesty, raw and unguarded, in a way that caught me off guard. He went on softer. I thought being tough meant keeping everyone at arm's length. Turns out all it does is make you lonely. Something in me shifted hearing that. The man who once seemed so unshakable suddenly looked human. Not less strong, just more real. I didn't know what possessed me, but I said quietly, "You're not the only one who doesn't know how to connect." His eyes flicked to mine, searching, and for a moment, neither of us looked away. Time slipped. The afternoon light dimmed into evening, shadows stretching across the room. Our conversation was between serious and light-hearted. His stories from the job, my stupid college mishaps, sarcastic jabs traded back and forth until laughter filled the spaces silence used to own. At one point, I reached for my soda can at the same time he reached across for his bottle. Our hands brushed. Neither of us moved right away. Later, his knee shifted under the table, pressing lightly against mine. Could have pulled back. He could have too, but neither of us did. The contact was small, almost accidental, but it pulsed with something that made my skin buzz. Found myself leaning forward, elbows on the table, talking softer without meaning to. He mirrored me, his eyes never straying far from mine. For the first time, I didn't feel like he was interrogating me. I felt like he was seeing me. And God, I like being seen. When I finally glanced at the clock, it was later than I realized. I stood, clearing my throat. I should go. He didn't argue, just nodded and walked me to the door. But as I stepped onto the porch, I felt his presence close behind me, warm and steady. Thanks for staying, he said quietly. I nodded, gripping the rail. Thanks for listening. His eyes held mine for a long, loaded moment. Something almost passed between us, something that made my chest ache with both fear and longing. But neither of us moved closer. Neither of us spoke again. I walked down the steps, the air cool against my skin, my pulse still thrumming with the memory of his knee against mine, his eyes steady on me. That night I lay awake in bed, restless, my body ached for something I couldn't name, something I wasn't ready to admit. Nothing physical had happened, but in a way the intimacy of that evening felt even more dangerous, because wanting to be touched was one thing. Wanting to be known, that was something else entirely. I used to tell myself I hated him, that he was nothing but a hard-edged, arrogant man who had tried to corner me and didn't know how to treat people right. I clung to that anger like armor, convinced it would keep me safe. But things had shifted. The drinks, the conversations, the way he listened, it all chipped away at the walls I thought were unbreakable. Somewhere along the line I stopped waiting for the job to end and started counting the days until I saw him again. Scared me how much I craved it. I tried to fight it. One Friday night, a friend set me up on a date with someone closer to my age. A guy from campus, easy smile, quick jokes, the kind of person I should have wanted. We went to a diner, split fries, talked about classes and music and summer plans. He leaned in, once, eyes sparkling, and I forced a smile. But inside I felt nothing. No pull, no spark. Every laugh sounded hollow in my ears. Every smile felt practiced. And when he brushed my hand on the table, the only image that filled my head was someone else's hand. Rougher, larger, trembling slightly as it lingered too long on mine. I left the date early with some excuse about being tired. Walking home, all I could think was I was ruined. Ruined for anyone else. Because all I wanted was the man I'd sworn I couldn't have. A couple nights later, I wasn't feeling great. Some bug. Or maybe just exhaustion, but I'd skipped work, stayed curled on the couch, with a blanket and half-warmed tea. My phone buzzed a few times with missed calls I didn't answer. Then near midnight there was a knock at my door. I dragged myself up, opened it, and there he was. He stood in the hallway, hands in his jacket pockets, concern etched deep in his face. "You didn't show today," he said. His voice was quiet, not accusing, just worried. "You sick?" I blinked at him, stunned. "How? Do you even know where I live?" He shrugged lightly. "Small neighborhood. People talk." Then after a pause, "Mrs. Turner said you looked pale the other day. Figured I'd check in." I should have told him to leave. Should have said I was fine. Shut the door and kept the boundary clear. But I didn't. Instead I stepped back. "Come in." He set his jacket on the chair and looked around my small apartment like he was cataloging details. Not judging, just seeing. The blanket tossed over the couch, the stack of textbooks on the table, the empty ramen cups by the sink. "You shouldn't push yourself so hard," he said, tone firm but gentle. "Bills don't wait," I muttered, sinking back into the couch. He sat down on the armchair across from me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The room felt charged, heavy with everything we hadn't said yet. I tried to fill the silence with deflection. "So, what? You're my personal health inspector now?" Maybe, he said, and his mouth quirked in that almost smile that made my chest ache. Something in me cracked then. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the quiet way he showed up without asking. But I couldn't hold the denial anymore. "It drive me crazy," I blurted, voice low. "Told myself I hated you, that I didn't want anything to do with you. But I stopped, throat tight. All I do is think about you." His eyes widened slightly, and for once he didn't have a quick answer. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, searching my face like he wasn't sure if he'd heard me right. The air between us thickened. I could feel the pull, electric and dangerous. And this time I didn't stand up and walk away. When he finally crossed the room, it felt inevitable. He paused in front of me, hesitating like he was asking. Without words, my heart hammered so hard it hurt. Then his hand brushed mine. Just a feather-like touch, trembling, and I didn't pull back. Our faces were so close I could feel his breath, warm and uneven. Then slowly he leaned in and our lips met. The kiss was hesitant, almost fragile, like either of us might break it if we pressed too hard. But the spark that leapt through me was undeniable. Every nerve lit, every wall crumbling. All at once, I clutched his shirt, holding on, terrified and exhilarated. All at once, when we finally broke apart, both of us were shaking. He looked down at me, eyes raw and uncertain. "I don't hate you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Not anymore." He let out a shaky breath, his forehead resting against mine. "I was hoping you'd say that." Weeks passed, and with each one the sharp edges between us smooth. What used to be clipped orders and stiff nods became shared words. Quiet jokes, moments that felt startlingly normal. One evening after finishing his yard, I didn't pack up right away. The mower sat cooling in the garage while I lingered on the porch. Steps, sweat drying on my skin, my heart beating faster than it should have. "You're not leaving?" he asked from the doorway, voice curious but not unkind. Met his gaze and shook my head. "Not tonight." For a long second he just looked at me. Then he stepped aside and said, "Come in." Dinner was simple. Grilled chicken, roasted potatoes, a salad that looked like he'd actually tried. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, clinking glasses, trading stories between bites. He told me about his first dog, a mutt he'd rescued as a rookie, and I told him about the time I accidentally set the toaster on fire at my dorm. It shouldn't have been funny, but the way he laughed, loud, unguarded, made it feel like the best story I'd ever told. By the time the plates were empty, the kitchen was warm with more than just food. Was laughter, steady eye contact, a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. We moved to the couch. After a low lamp casting soft light over the room, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable, like an exhale after years of holding my breath. His arm brushed mine as he shifted, and this time I didn't hesitate. I leaned into him, resting lightly against his shoulder. He stilled, then let out a slow breath and relaxed into me. The world outside seemed to fade. When he finally tilted my chin up, I didn't resist. His lips met mine again, no longer hesitant, still careful, but deeper sure. The kiss stretched slow. At first, then hungrier, and need we'd both been holding back, finally spilling free. I felt his hands slide against mine, fingers intertwining, grounding me, even as everything else felt like it was unraveling. We shifted closer until there was no space left between us. Every brush of his mouth against mine. Promise I'd been waiting for. The night unfolded gently, not rushed, but full of urgency all the same. A balance of tenderness and heat. Laughter between kisses. The weight of his hands steady on my back, like he'd never let me fall. It wasn't about power anymore, or intimidation or walls. It was about release, about finally letting go of fear and letting something real take root. Later, when the world had quieted and we lay tangled on the couch, the air smelled faintly of soap and rain drifting through the cracked window. He traced small circles on my arm with his thumb, and I let myself melt into the rhythm. I thought about the first day I met him, how much I'd hated the way he looked at me, how convinced I'd been that he was nothing but a man built from walls and shadows. And here we were, breathing in sync, those same walls, leveled brick by brick. I thought I was just mowing lawns, I murmured into the hush, a wry smile tugging at my mouth. Turns out I was cutting away the walls I built around my own heart. He chuckled softly, kissed the top of my head, and pulled me closer. And for the first time, I didn't feel like running. Didn't feel like denying what was between us. I felt grateful. Grateful I hadn't walked away. Grateful I'd stayed long enough to discover what lived behind the armor. Love, slow and stubborn, had finally found its way through. I never expected to find it here, but I did. And as I held on to him, I knew I wouldn't let